Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm Louise Herring, one of the SPP Human Rights Chapter co-chairs. Very nice to have you here. Please feel free to turn your cameras on if you want to just say hi to the speakers so that they know there's a human being there. That would be really nice. You don't have to have it on all the way through. Just always nice to see a face if you're presenting online. We're going to give it a couple of minutes because we've got quite a lot of people registered and want to make sure we can get them all in. And then we'll explain how the session's going to run. We're going to be using the Q&A function, so please throughout feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, which you should see in the top of your menu. Very nice to have everyone join us today. Hello, thank you for starting us off. Elaine, thank you. Please do feel free to use the chat. I think that's one of the usual SPP formats, is for people to pop in the chat where they are in the world, what they're interested in, why they've joined today's session. So please do use the chat for those informal connections. So I can see we've got someone in Singapore. It'd be great to know where else other people are. Thank you, Natasha. Natasha's in Malaysia. Great to have you with us. We have someone in a cold and windy environment in Warsaw. Wow. Scott is in Spain, where it's sunny. I'm in the UK, where it's unusually sunny. I can see Paula's in the UK as well. Matthijs, are you somewhere sunny?
Yeah, sort of, in the Netherlands. It's in between.
Netherlands. Yes, great. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. I can see everyone introducing themselves. That's really great. Okay. So let's get the session started. The session, so everyone is aware, is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording via YouTube or some other means, so please do bear that in mind as you're participating. I will just run through a few bits of housekeeping and then we will get started officially with the content. So bear with me. So welcome everyone to today's session. Delighted to be joined today by Matthijs and Scott from Leisler Network, who are going to talk through building a business case for addressing heat stress and other human rights issues. This is a really pertinent topic for those of us in the global north, where it's hotting up over summer, and unfortunately we've seen lots of issues of wildfires and other issues associated with heat stress in recent weeks. Also really important topic for the Sustainable Procurement Pledge in terms of trying to understand how do we get procurement teams engaged on this topic and make a business case for investing in this area. So we're going to have lots of time to talk through that today. Very briefly, just to introduce the Sustainable Procurement Pledge Human Rights Chapter. Myself and Victoria, hopefully some of you have joined previous sessions, have been working together on the Human Rights Chapter for about the last year and a half. I'm here representing AIM Progress, which is a forum that I run of consumer goods companies. I also run a company called Inherently Human, which is a human rights consultancy. Victoria is an ex-CPO who works very much in the procurement space. So together we work on the Human Rights Chapter. And you're very welcome to join the group. I'll put the link into the chat later if you're not already members. In terms of what we're trying to do within the Human Rights Chapter, we have a big focus on trying to raise the awareness of procurement professionals around human rights issues, as well as around regulations and around projects going on in this space. So this is a really great opportunity to do that. We're trying to promote an open dialogue among procurement professionals about the complexities of dealing with human rights practices. So please do use that chat function today to share maybe what you're doing in this space around issues like heat stress. We're really trying to create a safe space. We know that human rights can often be a challenging topic to talk about. We want to create a safe space to ensure that human rights is embedded in procurement practices. And long term, we're really looking to promote the relevance of human rights and promote human rights as an issue with senior procurement leaders. So if you haven't joined the Human Rights Chapter, please do think about joining us as a group. we're always open to suggestions and ideas from people of what you'd like us to cover in our topics. We're also developing an online learning journey for procurement colleagues on human rights, so there'll be more about that coming out in September. That's part of the way that the SPP work of developing learning journeys, which is resources and tools for procurement colleagues to use. So in terms of today's session, the way it's going to run, introduction and welcome I've done. I hope people have been introducing themselves on the chat. I'm going to hand over in a second to Scott from La Isla Network, and between Scott and Matthijs, they're going to talk through the work that they do managing heat stress and other issues in global supply chains. They will present for about 20-25 minutes, and then we will hand over to Q&A. Please do use the Q&A function, as I said at the beginning, for those who are just joining, to share any questions you have as we go through. We will get to those at the end of the presentation, and we will try to answer as many of those as possible. And please do continue to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and the kind of work that you're doing. So I will stop sharing my screen at that point, and I will hand over to Scott and Matthijs. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really looking forward to your presentation. Over to you guys.
Great, thank you. And Matthijs, I think, is going to control the PowerPoint, and then I will start off before I hand it over to my colleague. Great, thanks. So yeah, my name is Scott Montegna. I am the CEO with La Isla Network, which is an occupational health and safety organization. And before my colleague kind of gets into the business case around protecting workers, increasing productivity, I just want to start off giving a little background on who we are and the issues that we work on. Next slide. So at La Isla Network, we're a global team of researchers and practitioners, and we're all working collaboratively to make workplaces safer. And so our team is comprised of physiologists, epidemiologists, hygienists, nephrologists. We have 2 labor economists, legal, policy, and some public health professionals. And collectively, we rely on data-driven research to protect workers' health and improve the conditions that they're facing every day. We do this by focusing on jobs where the risk is the highest. And so this is typically the jobs with the heaviest workload, so those that are the most strenuous physically, and also those that are exposed to high temperatures. And beyond our team, we work with our partners in universities throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia, collectively researching and addressing heat stress injuries. And our commitment is not only to study and focus on the science around heat stress, but to work directly with businesses and at times workers themselves to develop policies and protocols for the unique conditions at each job site, and specifically the unique conditions for each job type within those sites. And so our goal is just simply to ensure that nobody's health is sacrificed by going to work. And on this slide, you can see the different industries where we work in agriculture, construction, mining, and many of the companies that we've partnered with over the last several years. We work in Central America, Caribbean, Europe, United States. In agriculture, for example, we've long worked in the sugar sector, which is one of the most physically demanding and hot environments you can work in. But we also work with buyers who are looking to ensure responsible sourcing of commodities, and directly with farms, mills, mining companies who on their own are proactively seeking a better understanding of the risks at their work sites and then ways to mitigate them. Next slide. So this report by ILO came out last year entitled Heat at Work. And as I think many people on this call know, there's rising global temperatures, and those rising global temperatures is a serious health threat to the general population, but specifically to workers who are working in very difficult conditions. It also affects economic productivity and, in the long term, industry sustainability. And so this report, it really just underscores what many of us who are in the field have been recognizing, which heat is becoming one of the most serious issues for worker health, and one historically that has been overlooked. But fortunately, with reports like this and with ongoing media attention, we are seeing more recognition of this risk to worker well-being. So this slide here, also from the ILO report. In that report, they found that there was approximately 2.4 billion workers worldwide who are exposed to excessive heat at some time, and this contributes to 23 million injuries each year. And by 2030, the report states that potentially 80 million jobs could be lost due to heat-related disruptions, and that's a financial loss reaching 2.4 trillion globally. Next slide. So this figure, $361 billion, also comes from the same report. And it represents the estimated global savings that we could achieve each year by just implementing basic occupational safety and healthy measures, specifically for heat-related injuries. And these savings come from reduced medical treatment costs and fewer income losses due to missed work. Next slide. So heat-related health risks, I think, for a long time, at least in my work, what I've been hearing is that this is an issue primarily in tropical areas, places like the Middle East, areas that are well known for having a hot climate. But what we are seeing is that this is also an issue that is increasingly being recognized, in part due to rising global temperatures in areas that aren't hot year-round, but are having substantial heat waves during their summers. So, for example, in Europe, the 3 warmest years on record for Europe have all happened since 2020. Temperatures on that continent are rising twice the global average. And I saw an article, this was last week, that Barcelona reported the hottest June on record this past month. And so it's a problem that's not going to go away, but with increasing temperatures, it's going to be something that we are facing right now, but are going to be facing even more in the near future. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, heat risks, risks to health due to heat have long been overlooked, but due to, again, the rising temperatures, there is a growing public awareness, especially among consumers and companies. We've seen a lot more media attention in the US, in Europe, worldwide. And fortunately, with this growing recognition, there is more demand and more pressure for the goods and foods that we consume to be produced without endangering the lives of workers. Here in this next slide, this is just more examples of what we are seeing reported widely. So the Time magazine, is focused on the deaths of thousands of workers in Qatar during the construction of the World Cup facilities. So it's something that we're seeing both in agriculture, construction, in many sectors. Next slide, please. It's just another example that heat stress is not going away. It's in the news, and again, this is one source from Singapore, another one from The Guardian, and during the summer months right now in Europe and in North America, we're seeing it, of course, more widely reported. But this is something that in areas again that are hotter year round is happening year round, and then is seasonal in places in the northern latitudes. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by heat stress? So this image shows just how complex heat stress really is for outdoor workers. It's not just about air temperature. Also it's solar radiation, humidity, wind speed, even the clothing that the workers are wearing. And so the body is constantly trying to regulate itself through perspiration, respiration, blood flow. But in extreme heat, especially during hard, strenuous physical labor, the systems can't keep up. And that's when we see health risks start to emerge. And these are everything from dehydration to heat stroke to kidney damage. And understanding this full picture is essential for designing effective protections. And so ultimately, the objective that we have, and anybody who's working on this issue, is to prevent the core temperature from workers from rising to a dangerous level, which is typically above 38 degrees Celsius. Next slide, please. So before I conclude and pass it over to Matthijs, I just want to reiterate that this is an issue that affects so many industries. agriculture often gets the most attention. After that, I think I've been seeing more attention focused on construction for good reason. But beyond those two industries, we're seeing this in mining, we see this in fishing, first responders, and even the tourism and hospitality sector. So it's something that is across sectors, across industries. It's a global challenge. And now I'll pass it over to Matthijs, and he can talk a bit about the business case related to addressing this.
Yes, now I'm not sure if my microphone is working. Yeah, let me double check. Thank you, Scott. Yes, I am Matthijs, so based in the Netherlands and helping LISA Network to build the network across Europe. I would like to zoom in a bit on the work we've done on the ground and also look at the bigger picture why investing in heat stress solutions and in the health of the workforce isn't just the right thing to do, but actually is a smart business case. And the good news is we already know what works. So over the past decade, a bit more, but LISA Network has developed simple and science-based workplace protocols. And I'm talking about a protocol with rest, shade, hydration, and hygiene, as you see here on the slide. So workers need mandatory breaks outside of the sun, starting already early in the day. And they need access to clean, fresh drinking water the entire day. And good hygiene good hygiene facilities are very important, especially for female workers, because if there aren't any facilities nearby or available at all, they won't drink enough water, because when it's difficult to relieve yourself as a female worker in the field or at a construction site with a lot of male workers, that's going to be an issue. So what we say is that we have to design job-specific and region-specific interventions. You can imagine that a construction site in Spain or Greece is something completely different than a winery in the UK or a celery field in Central America, construction site in the US. So job-specific, region-specific, and yes, local, regional, and company culture matters too. So our approach that combines science-based intervention with change management. So we help companies to implement practical solutions, but also embed them in their own operations so that protecting workers becomes part of the business case, part of your supply chain. And we've tested these protocols in real-world conditions, and they work and they get results. And that's a good thing. So at our Center of Excellence in Nicaragua, where we have developed this protocol, we tested it, we refined it, and we did it together with researchers, with the company, with, most importantly, the workers themselves. And already after 1 year, we saw some improvements. And after 3 years, the results were quite clear. So you see 80% fewer heat-related illnesses, a drop of 70% in chronic kidney disease, up to 20% increase in productivity, and this all together led to in the end, 60% return on investment. And that's real business value for the companies involved. I'm happy to say that the results were also recognized by the 2024 ILO report that Scott already spoke about before. Let's take a deeper dive, a closer look on how we accomplish this. I would like to start with an example of the most intense work. You see here the results of the most dangerous and heavy work in the sugarcane fields of Nicaragua. So, as Scott said, to keep workers safe, we have to keep their core body temperature below the 38 degrees Celsius. And with our protocols, we did. So how did we do that? By switching one long lunch break, you see here upper left, for many short breaks in the shade, already starting early in the day. And of course, by ensuring a constant hydration throughout the day, also already starting early in the day. And the workers stayed cool, the workers stayed healthy. And interestingly enough, workers worked fewer hours, but producing more. So what you see here, the yellow line is the working hours of the workforce here in our Center of Excellence. Almost 50%, it went almost 50% down, and the productivity almost doubled. They were fit, they were healthy, they were able to keep going. And that's a win for workers because they were healthy. And especially when you're paid by piece rate, your income goes up as well. And of course, that is probably pretty clear. It's also a win for producers because more productivity. So if we take a look at the return on investment after initial investments to do the assessments and to come up with the solutions, we already saw after year one a positive return on investment. But after 3 years of working with the local team, with the company, with the workers, it started to pay off. And you see here for every dollar invested, there was a $1.60 return on investment. And that's a result, to be honest, that even surprised the most optimistic souls within our own organization as well. So how did we get to this ROI of 60%? Of course, productivity went up, really important. But we also saw a lower staff turnover, a reduced absenteeism, less accidents, less hospital care, with less costs, and improved finance terms from development banks and less insurance costs. So your liability is completely different as a company. So to the question, what could you do with your company or within your company? So we use what we call a AAA program. Assess, address, and assist. First, assess. So assess your current risks in your supply chain. Look at your own occupational safety and health policies and local laws, and do an on-site worker health assessment. So you need this real-world data from your workers. How are they doing during the day? Do they drink sufficient water? Are they healthy? Are they fit? Is their core body temperature still below 38 degrees Celsius? With this data, you can actually address the gaps and develop workplace interventions, improvements with potentially a program with rest, shade, hydration, and hygiene to start working and improving on your workplace. Sounds quite simple, but it's in practice not as easy as it looks, because it's really, really important to engage all the teams in your organization or within your supply chain. You need to engage people, you need to monitor, evaluate, and keep improving for a couple of years. So change management here, changing your culture, is a really important component. And this is how you build a safer and more productive supply chain. So to face what we're facing now, climate change and extreme heat, we need radical change. We need structural solutions. And that's why we at LAISA Network have the ambition to scale up and build multiple centers of excellence in different regions and different sectors throughout the world, where they can serve as catalysts for a productive and healthy workforce within that region. Because what we do and develop in one region is actually scalable and repeatable. You don't have to do this alone if you work at a company and look at what we're asking. It seems maybe like a lot, but these centers of excellence work well with consortia, probably even better with companies, governments, banks, insurance companies, and workers working all together. So I think working together to create these regional hubs where you have experts and stakeholders co-create and test and develop the solutions for tomorrow, that's the way forward and the way we need to go. And yes, I know you have a lot on your plate already. Child labor, carbon emissions, consumer pressure, political pressure. And we know you have to stay profitable as well because you're running a business. And now we come here, I come here, Scott come here and tell you to invest in occupational safety and health. Well, I think there's good news, because investing in the health of your workforce actually delivers a more profitable supply chain. So you reduce risks, prevent costly incidents, lower your insurance cost, and you boost your ESG or your SDG impact, however you measure it within your organization. So this is a win-win. And just on a personal note, before we go to the questions, so I think it's really important that we stop treating worker protection only as a health issue or as a cost. Although from my perspective and my personal view, I have to say protecting the workforce, protecting the people who do the work is the right thing to do. And let's face it, no one should get ill or even die because they're just doing their job. But on the other side, more practical, you can also start treating it as what it is as well, a competitive advantage and a good business case. So this is our short presentation. So if you have any questions for Scott or for me, we of course would love to answer them and see if we can answer them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you very much indeed. That's fantastic. And I always love the amount of data on your slides. I've seen you guys present a couple of times and there's such a lot of fascinating information in them. It's always worth a read back. We have got some questions already. Would like to encourage people who are in the session to please put other questions that you've got into the Q&A. But I'm going to roll through a couple that have been submitted and a couple that we had submitted to us before the session, if that's okay. So we started off with a question from Dorota, who was in windy and rainy Warsaw, asking about data. So I think this fits, Matthijs, with your assess box in that model that you have, your AAA model. Do you have any suggestions for people of where they can get data about these risks from sources? I think the example Dorota's given us is about the ILO sharing data around fatal and non-fatal incidents. But I think I assume Dorota would be referring specifically to data around issues like heat stress.
To be sure to understand the questions, like specific data or general data, there's not a lot of data available on the impacts of heat stress on the workforce. So the ILO report of last year was really important also for us, because there hasn't been a lot of specific data on the impacts of heat and extreme heat on the workforce. Of course, there's a big focus on tourism. When someone dies walking in the mountains, you read it all over the place in the newspapers. And there's also on elderly people, for example. So we have numbers from, for example, in Europe, we had in 2022 over 60,000 deaths due to heat, but it's not specific for the workforce. So monitoring that is still a big issue. We have over 10 years of data of our own assessments. Of course, they're not public because we did them in collaboration with a lot of companies. So there is data available, but it's still not good enough, I think. Maybe Scott needs to add something. Yeah.
I mean, I just add to that, we have a lot of data for very specific job sites, where research has been done either by us as an organization or by, other organizations or universities. And so that data is out there and it has been published, peer-reviewed studies. But as far as general data, it's a bit hit and miss depending on the regions. So as Matthijs mentioned, for example, in much of Europe, they may report on the number of people who had died related to heat-related health issues, but it's not disaggregated to necessarily what was the activity that they were doing at that point in time. It may be more related to an event such as a heat wave that hit in the month of August. There's of course a lot of anecdotes out there, a lot of which is typically what is the information that we find in media stories around this issue. But if you have a very specific question about heat stress data, whether it has to do with workers, whether it has to do with the physiology, whatever that may be, after this webinar, you're more welcome to email me, and I can share with you, whatever studies that we have available from our organization or that we are aware of from other institutions.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I'm going to go now to a question from Laura. So Laura has asked, could you recommend, you can see these in the Q&A, Scott and Matthijs, I'm just reading them out to make it easier for you, but could you recommend a supply chain certification standard that successfully manages and includes the issues you have discussed in your presentation? And maybe recommend is too strong a word, because that might be a bit unfair to ask you to recommend, but perhaps you could just comment on whether you think that certification standards are yet up to speed on this issue and are including it.
Yeah, the short answer is no. We work with a variety of certifying bodies, and they are now just beginning to address worker health, and specifically worker health related to heat stress and heat-related injuries. Certifiers, in our experience, have long focused on other important issues, but worker health, and again, within the context of injuries caused by extreme heat and strenuous physical activity, is new. We have been having, I'd say, over the last couple of years, a lot of conversations, and they're moving that direction. We've long partnered with, because of our history working in the sugar sector for over 15 years, we partnered with Bonsucro, who is a certifier for sustainable sugar production, and they have started to incorporate that into their certification. And I know others are addressing it, but it is not something that has been a part of their criteria, unfortunately. But fortunately, it seems that now it's being recognized and it's being included.
Great, thank you. Matthijs, did you want to add anything on that?
No, just maybe it's a sideline to say that unions are really picking up the issue and stressing the importance of it. So that's not the same thing, but I'm really happy to see that big unions like BWI and also CNV International are really recognizing the issue, and ILO, of course. So I think that's a big step forward towards what we're hoping for with the certifiers.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump to a slightly linked question. So I'm just jumping around on the questions that we've had, and just encourage others to enter their questions, please, into the Q&A. So Noah has asked about indicators or criteria that could be used to assess whether a company is adequately managing heat stress. So in their question, they've talked about indicators or criteria that an inspector or a certifying body could use. But I guess the question could apply to, a customer looking at their suppliers. Do you have any suggestions on how you know whether a company is adequately managing heat stress?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, we as an organization who do these assessments and support companies in addressing this issue don't know truly whether or not they're adequately protecting their workforce until we get on the ground and do an assessment, and then via that assessment provide recommendations to mitigate the risks. Before we do assessments, we typically will get the policies and protocols from a particular company for us to review, which is part of the assessment process to see if those are being implemented. But even if they are being implemented, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is adequate for protecting workers within maybe a specific job type or in one area of their job site, because there's a lot of variability, like even in the sugar sector, for example, between somebody who's considered a seeder, somebody who is a cane cutter, somebody who's working in irrigation. They all have very different risks. And without actually doing an assessment, it's really difficult to know if those workers are being protected or not. So I'd say from a public perspective, the idea, the goal would be that you would have some legitimacy among some certifiers who have a history of really tracking this and really doing, whether it's an audit or however they're going to verify this, to ensure that these companies are doing what they say that they're doing, and so they're not just greenwashing the issue. But it's difficult without actually being on the ground and actually seeing what those conditions are and doing the measurements, both the environmental measurements that we do. At the same time, we're doing the physiological measurements when we have the workers strapped up and we have the actual the data to see, what is their core body temperature throughout the day.
Yeah, and interesting, the gap between policy and practice is interesting. I'm going to give one example that we did an assessment with a company that had really an impressive policy and a great team. But then going into the field, we saw quite a lot of gaps in practice. So, and they just didn't see it and they addressed it straight away. So they were really up for the good. But it's interesting if you go and look with, of course, from the outside, it's always easier. So it's really interesting to see the gap between policy and practice.
And in that particular example, Matthijs, did you manage to work out why there was a gap? Like why there was such a gap between policy and practice? Was it just that they didn't have the eyes and ears on at field level to monitor?
No, what you often see is you work in a certain way. You're used to working in a way. We probably do the same, you and I. And then yeah, things just go like they normally go, and then you forget that you need to change something. And it's culture. If you do like a certain agricultural product like for 100 years already, why change? And then you have to change things in practice. And every team member, from the worker to middle management to upper management, needs to be engaged. If you forget one person, it can all be messed up. And that can be by accident. Most of the time it is. If you have this great policy, why mess it up in practice? It wasn't that bad, by the way, but they did a lot of improvements after that. And it's really interesting to see how simple it was actually in this case to have a real impact for them. And because they wanted it as well. So it's really interesting.
I'd say in our experience working with companies, we often get buy-in from maybe senior leadership, maybe an occupational health team, various positions who are excited and want to address this issue. But as Matthijs mentioned, there could be essentially a weak link in the organization where either it has not been fully communicated to them what needs to be implemented or what needs to be monitored, or there are other priorities that have overtaken their attention. And so we've gone in with these assessments and thinking that everybody may be on board because of our communications prior to arriving. And this again could be with the CEO or with some director level position. And then you get there and you will find a critical position that if they are not well enough informed or not on board, that could be the source of the issue. And so part of what we do with these assessments is an organizational management assessment component to understand, where there is support, what is working, and what are some areas internally that they need to address.
That's really interesting. I'm going to go to Rebecca's questions now. So she's got Rebecca's in the UK working for one of the UK retailers. She's got a two-part question. So the first one was about any key commodities that you feel businesses should be being prioritised for heat stress impacts. So obviously you've talked about the work in sugar. I mean, I imagine this list might be slightly endless, but could you give Rebecca a bit of a sense of, if you were going to start and go beyond sugar, any key commodities you would highlight as vulnerable to heat stress?
Yeah, I mean, as a whole, I would say agriculture across different agricultural products, and from places from the tropics to Southern Europe, Southern United States, like California, where a lot of goods are produced or foods are produced. The conditions, it doesn't really matter if you're picking lettuce or radishes or you're cutting sugarcane. It all is can be physically very strenuous, and the outside conditions can be quite demanding, quite hot. So outside of agriculture, as I mentioned in the webinar, construction is also a big one. Surprising to, I think, a lot of people is mining. It actually gets extreme, can be very, very hot in the mines, the subterranean mines, but as well as in the smelters, where they're melting down the ore. It's, really an issue that is across sectors. Unless these goods are being produced in an air-conditioned environment or someplace very cool, or if it's not very strenuous, then I would say that there is a real chance that there is some issues for some of those jobs at those companies.
Great, thank you. And could you maybe just touch on, because I know your work, obviously you talked today about the work in Nicaragua, but there's also the work in Spain that you've done. Was there any material differences between those, the sort of the approach or the way that you worked? Obviously the stakeholders will be slightly different, but any particular differences that's worth commenting on here that would be helpful for people to understand?
Yeah, so I mean, someplace in Spain, the risks are there, but the risks are there for a shorter duration during the year. It's usually, well, right now, as you get into June, July, August, and September, like in Andalusia, the southern part of Spain, where a lot of vegetables and fruits are grown and then shipped throughout Europe, those 4 months can be potentially very dangerous. And there are a lot of incidences that we know of that have occurred on the farms in those areas. Whereas, someplace in Central America, it's year round. They don't really ever get a relief.
Great.
Yeah, I would love to answer the other part of the question that Rebecca
Please do.
asked. Yeah. So she asked if we encourage businesses to invest in building new centers of excellence. The answer is yes, please do so. So we did the one in Central America, and it's really interesting to see that we've developed the center of excellence in Nicaragua, and to see that other countries in the same region are now copying it and working in the same way. So it's spreading throughout the region. And that's what we envision as well for other regions and other commodities. So I think if you look at Spain, for example, if you talk about Europe or India, if you look at cotton, having centers of excellence where we learn and refine and create the protocols is crucial. And you can do that as a consortium of companies, for example. If you do this in Spain and you have developed a protocol in for example, Murcia or Granada, and then you can use that in the other parts of Spain as well, in Italy, in the south of France, in Greece. So you can repeat the same thing, and you can all use the protocols you develop together and to improve your supply chain. So their answer is yes, we need to follow up and scale up and do the next step.
Yeah, and that's how we've had a lot of success in Central America, specifically because it's through the Center of Excellence that we have in Nicaragua is how we, one, disseminated the results, but two, because there are associations. For example, there's the Central American Sugar Producers Association. What we were able to do and learn in Nicaragua was easily disseminated amongst the other members of the association in El Salvador and Honduras, in Guatemala. And then as we have worked on assessments in other regions, our partner Nicaragua has been fantastic, where they have invited these other companies for a visit so that they can actually see, like, on the ground, how did the implementation of these programs work, and get a direct feedback, not from us, an NGO, physiologists and epidemiologists, or whatever our professional background is, but from the company itself. They can speak the same language, and they can share their experience and answer the questions that may be a priority for these other companies who are considering it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to a question now from Camilla. So Camilla was asking about the applicability of these kind of measures and the work that you do for supply chains that have informal smallholders in them. So yeah, if you could, I don't know if that is work that you guys have done, or maybe you could just talk about it in a more theoretical level.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's a lot more challenging. So I would say Nicaragua was, the Center of Excellence we developed there was kind of an ideal workplace because the land, for the most part, was managed by the company, where the cane was produced, where the cane was refined. It was all essentially under the same company, with a little bit coming from smaller holders or other cooperatives. Whereas we've done quite a bit of work in Mexico as well, but the challenge with Mexico is you may have hundreds and hundreds of small landholders who are producing the cane that then is going to a cooperative, or then is going to a buyer, such as a mill. And so to spread out changes in something that is fragmented in that environment is much more challenging. Now we are getting into that area right now. We are learning about some of the challenges with that, but it's not the low-hanging fruit. It's something that is going to take a lot more effort, a lot more planning with local either governments or associations that are connected with those landholders to slowly make some of the changes to protect those individuals who are working on those kinds of job sites.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we spoke with our team in India about this. It was really interesting indeed. An issue there is indeed you need the local partners that have the connections with many smallholders, and also find the champions that are already there, and make sure that they start working with new protocols and they start doing the dissemination for you and start talking about it. But you need the local partners. That's really key. That's why we have local teams available, because it's not, we can't go everywhere and say you need to change this. It's not just not the way things work. You need your local partners and their buy-in.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to the question from Sandrine now. It's a two-part question, so I don't know if you want to have a little look at it in the Q&A, Scott and Matthijs. But Sandrine's asking about other climate change risks. So increasing risks in terms of human rights. I hope you can hear me all right. Such as forced labour or water scarcity or food insecurity. I don't know if those are issues that La Isla Network works on. It might not be a question for you guys, but I think Sandrine's trying to understand how you're seeing climate change increasing those risks, and whether that's something that you're working on in terms of how businesses can identify, or collaborations can identify and improve those situations.
Yeah, it's a complex issue because climate change affects so many different areas of our lives. In regards to the environment, it's something we hear a lot about. You know, when we're in the field and we're doing the health assessments, just by being there and working with the mills or the mines or whatever the companies are, we hear about the effects of water scarcity. We hear about the effects of, you know, increasing temperature, deforestation. It's not something that we directly address. The issue with forced labor and migration, also another big issue. You can't really escape it. We have been getting more and more involved in that, but more within the context of the health of those workers.
Sorry, thanks so much everyone for the great questions. If you've got more questions, please feel free to pop those in. I'm just going to go to one of the early questions that we had at the start of the session. Just thinking about when you start to work with companies on the types of projects you talked about today, Scott and Matthijs, can you talk about how they make the business case to their senior leaders? Do they need to, or is it actually senior leaders that are coming to you saying they want to do this work? Can you talk a little bit about how that interaction works? Because my understanding is there is money required to do these projects. Obviously, it requires an investment. You've talked about some of the technology that's needed, Scott, to monitor worker well-being. So how do you work with businesses? Or if you can talk us through an anonymous example, that would be great.
It depends. So there are some companies we work with where the senior leadership have been the champion. You know, they have recognized that whether it's brand recognition, whether it's their own ethics and morals, whatever that decision is coming from the senior leadership, that this is something that they prioritize. Other cases, it's been somebody else within the company. It could be on more of a corporate social responsibility side, maybe more of an occupational health side, and they need to sell the idea for investing initially before there's a return on investment on protecting the workforce. The studies that we've done on return on investment is helpful. The data that we have on increased productivity is also helpful. So we're happy to feed whatever information we need for somebody then to take this information and make the case on why this might be good for their company as well. But yeah, ultimately, it really is, it's different from one company to the next. For example, there's one sugar company in Brazil that we worked with, and it was the CEO who was just an avid bicyclist. And he sat in a webinar, and he was fascinated about the increased productivity of rest and the physiology. It was a more science-based webinar that one of our team members provided. And he connected it to his own recreational activities. But then he took that and started thinking about his workforce and how they could be more productive, and how they, what was being discussed in that webinar would be so relevant to them because of how strenuous their work is. And so he became the champion. And so that's just kind of like some random example of why somebody from that company got interested and then contacted us, and then we partnered with them. But yeah, overall, it just really depends whether that interest comes from senior leadership, or if it needs to be sold because it's coming from a other position in the company that then needs to bring that information to the ultimate decision makers.
Great, thank you. Matthijs, did you want to add anything into that?
No, I can talk hours about this. This is the core of my work. And I talk to a lot of companies on different levels, and it's really interesting because you always have your local champions also. And the bigger the company, the more difficult it becomes sometimes, because they have C-suite, they have shareholders, they need to be profitable. And for example, we work with G's Group from the UK. That's a family-owned business, if I'm correct. Their CEO is one of the champions. He is really into this, so he cares and he wants to do stuff, and not only with us. But what we encounter sometimes, that it's simpler for a company to say, okay, we're gonna buy electric cars for our staff, and we're gonna stop I don't know, investing in oil or whatever, and work on a carbon emission. It's easy. It's simpler to work on mitigation than on adaptation. We don't sell a product that you can just buy and we send it and you get it and you start using it. We sell a concept, and that's more difficult for, on some levels, for some organizations to understand, to comprehend, and start working with it. That's why the data that Scott already mentioned and the outcomes are so crucial for the work we do. But we have to always make sure that when we tell the story, it differs per organization. They have different needs, different culture, different issues, and so we need to adapt to that as well, and often together with a group of people within the company. So it's really interesting to see that.
But that's really, I mean, what you've described sounds really interesting, because it's actually the positioning of this, from the example that you just gave, sounds more like it's coming in under the kind of climate change strategy rather than human rights. I mean, obviously it intersects both, but I think that's,
yeah.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it depends on if you check company websites, and I always do before I start talking, of course, sometimes they have one SDG policy or ESG, and everything fits under the title. And sometimes they have a real human rights chapter and a real climate change chapter, and it depends. So there are many and big differences. Sometimes you're just being very sad and disappointed if you read it, because it's just words, nothing happening. And sometimes it's the other way around. You just think, wow, this big company I never heard of is doing a lot to improve this world. So it's really interesting to see that and start reading from some companies.
Right, thank you. We've got one final question that I'm just going to cover, which I think mirrors a little bit the question that we had earlier from Noah, but I'd like to just revisit it because I'm guessing that it's sort of critical for quite a lot of people on the call. So again, Christine is asking about metrics that can be used to monitor how vendors are performing at addressing their heat risks. And I wonder whether this is a consistent theme for people on the call, about how you understand whether your partners, your suppliers are really addressing these issues. So I'm going to ask you that really unfair thing, Scott, if there's one thing that you'd encourage people to look out for in their supply chains that might help them to know, is this issue being taken seriously? What might that one thing be?
I would start off just by asking simply what are the policies and protocols that your company has for protecting worker health? What are the occupational and safety health measures that are in place? And that response there will be pretty telling whether or not they have at least an idea, at least they've thought about a comprehensive program within their company to protect their workers, or if it's something that is not even on their radar. Because the metrics themselves that we use in assessment isn't something that just a buyer of the general public is going to have access to. And maybe the company doesn't even know, because they haven't done an assessment for that to even be reported on. But if I had nothing to go on and I was working with a company, I think I would just start by asking how are occupational and safety health addressed at your company? And that would be a starting point.
Great, thank you. Matthijs,
and go check it out. Go check it out. Yeah, go and check it out yourself. You know, it's no rocket science to see if people are protected or not, if they have PPE, if there's water, if there's hygiene facilities. You'll know soon enough if you're in the field for a couple of days.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say to be careful with is, doing these assessments for a long time, you start to tell when protections are put in place for your visit versus maybe protections that are, well established, regardless if there's a visitor. So having access, moving around, spending a few days, if your company has the ability to do these site visits, or relying on partners who do, can be pretty telling.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been really, really interesting to explore all of this with you. Thank you to everyone that has asked a question. Lots for you to follow up on. We will share the recording to the session. I'm sure that Matthijs can put in the contact details again. Maybe you want to pop them in one final time into the chat, Matthijs, before people drop off. But I think you know where to reach Scott and Matthijs. Thank you everyone that's joined. If you haven't already joined the SPP Human Rights Chapter, please do join. I've put the LinkedIn in the chat, and we would love to hear from you what future sessions you would like to hear. But thank you very much indeed, everyone, today. Hope you enjoyed the session and wish you a great rest of day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really interesting.